most everyone has been let into the meeting. Good evening, welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. This is the East 52nd Avenue Feasibility Study, our virtual community open house, and we thank you for joining us. And this is a nice way to see you, albeit we do wish it was in person, but thank you for your flexibility in joining us this evening for this virtual community open house. I am Angela Wolcott. I will share a little bit more about the team that's with us tonight to present to you in just a moment. But I wanted to at least say hello and let you know that I will be your guide in helping facilitate tonight's meeting. And in a moment, I will introduce other members of the project team, but hopefully you joined the correct meeting. Again, it's 52nd Avenue. Good to see you. In just a moment, you're going to hear from Victoria. She will be providing Spanish interpretation this evening. So Victoria, please go ahead. Leah, if I can't hear her, I just want to make sure that others can hear her. So we may not be able to get our Spanish interpreter, Victoria, to speak at this very moment. Let me see if I'm... Okay, so I just want to make sure if we do have a little bit of a technical difficulty, I will let you know that we do have Spanish interpretation available this evening. So just want to draw your attention to the very bottom of the menu on the screen. So kind of scroll over the screen if you are joining with a computer. You can see in the bottom in the menu bar that you can click on interpretation and you can switch yourself over to the Spanish channel. And hopefully in a moment here, we might be able to get Victoria to at least say hello to the English participants. I wish I knew how to say that in Spanish, but I don't. So thank you for bearing with us. There might be a few of these little kind of organic technical glitches tonight, but we'll keep going. So let me go ahead and walk through the agenda and talk a little bit more about what you can expect from tonight's presentation. We do have a lot to get through, but we're going to provide a good overview. And I know we have members of our community working group that have heard some of this before. So thank you so much for joining us. So we'll go through some of the background and overview, and then we'll start talking about existing conditions and some of what we've been doing and hearing from some of the community members and residents in the area. And then we'll start talking a little bit more about some of the cross sections, and there will be plenty of opportunity for discussion tonight. So about 1/3 of the way through, we will have our first polling activity. So there will be ways for you to interact with us, and we'll have multiple polling activities and questions, and we will have 4 question and answer periods. And I do want to just kind of quickly give some lay of the land and some meeting guidelines. We're going to try our best during the first question and answer section to unmute everyone that is on the phone and online participating tonight. So what that means is that we just would like people to try not to talk over one another. So please try to be respectful and allow others an opportunity to speak. And this is a little bit more challenging since we're not in person, but we will try our best. If you do have something that you would like to share, please make sure to state your name. That will help us introduce you if you do have a topic you'd like to talk about, or at least let project team members address your question more personally. So please tell us who you are during those Q&A sections before you start to speak. And then also just keep in mind, if that first Q&A section doesn't go as well, and if it's hard to hear everyone, we might switch it during the second, third, and fourth to be a little bit more of a monitored chat. Just that way we can unmute people if they do have questions. So think about putting your question in the chat feature. There's a chat feature. You can type your question in. So you can also provide feedback that way tonight as well. One more item before I introduce the team. We are recording the meeting. This is just to allow people that were not able to join us to watch it at a later date. So we do want to just draw your attention to that. It's going to be posted on the project website within a few days after this meeting. The next slide, please. So you can see here a lot of the project team. It's not all of the project team, but a fair amount of the team is here tonight with us. So in a moment, you're going to hear from Karen Good. She is the project manager with City and County of Denver. And then myself helping kind of moderate and guide the discussion tonight. And then Leah Lingerman, she is the air traffic controller. So she's helping with production and helping monitor the polling questions. Thank you, Leah. And Matt Buster, he is on the David Evans and Associates team, and he will walk through some of the technical background tonight, Matt. And then we have Will Wagenlander, and Will is also part of the consultant team, and he'll go through some of the technical analysis as well. And of course, Victoria, she is providing translation services tonight. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Karen, and I will speak with you again in a few moments.
Hi, everyone. And as Angela said, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you taking the time to spend a little bit of your evening with us. We'd much rather be in person, but not right now. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the 52nd Ave feasibility study. Again, hopefully you're in the right meeting. And what our purpose here is to understand what the community wants, not just on 52nd and the idea of 52nd connecting between Colorado and Brighton, but also a couple other important projects in the area, important focus areas. And one of those is connecting to National Western Center Station for the N line, and the other is the Brighton York underpass. So we'll talk a lot more about that, but the big picture that you need to know now is that we don't have funding for any of these projects. We really want to hear from you all as to what your priorities are. They could be all of these projects, they could be none of these projects, they could be something that's different from any of those that we've identified, but that tie in and support some of the ideas in there. So we want to really hear from you. And in terms of where we are in the planning process, we're really right at the start. We have completed our existing conditions analysis, and we have done, hopefully some of you have seen the flyers that have been distributed through the council newsletter and through the neighborhood. We got some great feedback from an online survey, and we will share that with you in just a few moments. And we have a wonderful community working group. We had two, and everyone was getting along splendidly. So we combined two into one so we could have more robust conversations between the business entities and residents. So we do have one collaborative community working group that's been wonderful, and that we have shared some initial information with to get feedback on, so that we are trying to pull in some initial feedback from community members to then help inform this process and make this meeting better for you all. The big picture of what we're doing for 52nd specifically is looking at the engineering feasibility of that greater connection between a direct connect between Brighton straight through to Colorado Boulevard. And we'll get into some options and get some feedback from you. And the dream team of Will, Matt, and Angela will be talking through this. Angela will be helping facilitate, as she said, those polling questions, and Will and Matt will provide a lot of really, I think, fascinating technical information. And we really look forward to hearing a lot more from you this evening. So with that, I'll talk a little bit more about that community working group that I mentioned is sort of the marriage of business representation and residential representation. We have folks from the Globeville Elyria Swansea Coalition, as well as the council office, Colorado Motor Carriers Association, Denver Streets Partnership, which represents both pedestrian and bike interests and priorities, JK Concepts Cabinets and Woodworking, and the 52nd and Vasquez Scale Company. So big thanks to folks from there that are on the call and for their support and feedback getting us here. So with that, I'm going to jump into our focus areas and talk a little bit about those. I mentioned I can't I can't talk sitting on my hands. So I mentioned the idea of 52nd connecting straight through from Brighton to Colorado Boulevard. How could that happen? Well, Matt and will get you informed on that very shortly. Then we have, next slide, the focus area 2. I mentioned that before. That's little blue box on the map here to get you oriented. That is the Brighton York underpass, and that heads up to Suncor and to Adams County and is currently fairly constrained. And all of these will go into more detail. I'm just preview of coming attractions here. Focus area 3, as I mentioned before, is that National Western Center N-line station connectivity. So that will focus on how folks can get there, what we want to think about for improvements. And obviously we do have some exciting new connectivity options there with the 47th pedestrian bridge. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the survey that we had up. We got a good number of responses, and the big picture results are that there's an agreement in the need for improvements on 52nd and at that Brighton York underpass. And there isn't one direction that everyone doesn't want to go north or east or west or south. There's a need for overall better connectivity in the area. And I'm going to pause for 2 seconds to give Victoria a minute to catch up. She smiled and gave me a big thumbs up. So I'll just stop talking for a minute. And if you guys really need some filler, I have some Laffy Taffy to tell jokes. So be careful. They're terrible jokes. Okay, so we talked about, just to catch up, connectivity in all directions, and that the local network is more important than that larger regional network. Folks said we really need to focus into the neighborhood. And the other important thing that we learned was that low volume streets, as we currently have, in part due to the lack of connectivity, there are some benefits to that lack of connectivity because the volumes of the streets are low. Next slide, please. So one of the questions we asked was, what transportation improvements are most important to you? And if you look at the graphic here, it gives you an idea that the answer is yes, all of them. Vehicular connections are important. Bicycle connections are important. A combined bike and pedestrian connectivity is important, as well as standalone pedestrian connectivity and freight as well. Transit, also important and critical. And often we say if somebody is taking a transit trip, they're also a pedestrian or a cyclist. So some things to think about there in terms of how important all of the modes are when we're working through the vision for the area. And then I mentioned before that connectivity in all directions is important. Well, we had some different options for people to provide feedback on, what are the gaps that are most important to fill. Connectivity east to Colorado Boulevard and connectivity to bike facilities came in at the top. Close second, if you will, was the connectivity north along Brighton under that rail underpass, the Brighton York underpass, as well as direct connectivity from 52nd to Brighton Boulevard, connectivity to the station, that National Western Center station, and connectivity to transit stops, and that freight access across the railroad, connectivity south across 70, across the river, et cetera. There's just a lot of competing connectivity that it's important in all directions for all different reasons. And I'm going to pause a second before we go forward. Okay, we're good. Okay. So we're going to jump into the 52nd focus area, and I'm going to hand over to Will. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Karen. Happy to be here with all of you tonight. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the first focus area, and that's from 52nd Avenue to Brighton Boulevard, connecting Brighton to Colorado, and really looking at ways that we can increase mobility and connectivity across this specific area within the study. One thing that we'd like you to keep in mind as we kind of get into the polling, into the discussion, is understanding right of way. And that's an important component, constraint, and or opportunity that's part of this project. And right of way is reserved space, publicly owned land for transportation purposes, such as highways, sidewalks, rail transport, and other infrastructure. And this is essentially the sandbox that we're playing in relative to the different elements that you might like to see on the street. Now, specifically along 52nd Avenue, within this focus area, we have three more or less different right-of-ways that we are working with. The first stretches from Vasquez all the way to almost to the residential communities there, and that's 59 to 60 feet in width. And then there's a smaller, more constrained 50-foot section as you get a little further into the neighborhood, and then a much smaller 21-foot right-of-way that's immediately adjacent to the freight rail line, both on the east and west sides. So the big picture is that there's very limited right-of-way on the west side to do improvements, and there is more available right-of-way on the east side for improvements. As we move through the rest of the presentation, as you see at the bottom of the slide, when you see ROW, that essentially means right of way. So just wanted to kind of go over what we see out there today. Like I said, there's a lot of different right of way widths, and then even within that condition, there's a bunch of different roadway conditions, and there's 5 that you see here. One is that 35-foot right of way roadway within a 59-foot existing right of way, and that has formalized walks as well as curb and gutter. And then you get into the 60-foot section, which is a little farther to the east, where you have more of the commercial uses. And that's where you see a lack of sidewalks or limited sidewalk opportunities. And then with these additional ones, you can see that there's multiple iterations of the roadway as it moves through a fairly small area. And then lastly, we have a 21-foot existing right-of-way immediately adjacent to the freight rail line, which is essentially just a roadway and a gravel shoulder. So I'm going to pass off the presentation to Matt to talk about some ideas and concepts related to alignments for 52nd Avenue.
Hello, everyone. I am Matt Buster with David Evans and Associates. I'm a project manager leading the engineering efforts in the study. And essentially what we're going to show you tonight are 3 of our initial alignments for your consideration, and we'd like to receive your input. A critical thing to keep in mind as we discuss these is any piece of any alignment can be shifted amongst alignments. So if you see something you like in alignment 1 that you'd like to see added to alignment 2, please keep those things in mind. But the first alignment that we will show you is the least impactful, and it essentially just improves the local street network along 52nd Avenue by adding some sidewalks, curb, gutter, trying to deal with some of the drainage issues that exist today. And it would be more focused to the right-of-way improvements and therefore would not create impacts to the adjacent properties. It would include some additional bicycle and pedestrian sidewalks, bike lanes. And also we're considering perhaps just another pedestrian bridge, bike bridge, similar to what exists at 47th Avenue. But in this option, we're not looking at a vehicular crossing across the center railroad you see there, which is the Union Pacific Railroad. This option has limited impacts to adjacent properties, and it also has looked at an at-grade crossing, but the combination of the Union Pacific Railroad together with the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission of Colorado, will not allow the at-grade crossing due to safety concerns. So we've kind of aborted studying any further an at-grade crossing on this alignment. The next alignment essentially would create a full connectivity across the railroad. It would add pedestrian, bicycle, and vehicular improvements continuously from Vasquez to the Brighton intersection. The new intersection at Brighton would be a four-way combined intersection with the existing York Street intersection. So it'd be a four-way signal. In addition, there would be the grade separation at the railroad that you see on the screen. And we can look at either an underpass where there would be a tunnel going beneath the rail, or an overpass option where we would go over the rail. We'll discuss these a little further in the presentation, but just to give you an idea. In addition, this alignment essentially would have some impacts to the neighborhood street system lying south of 52nd due to the grade separation, because when 52nd becomes either elevated or recessed, those local streets will no longer connect to 52nd, and therefore there would need to be a frontage road where those black lines are shown on the screen. In addition, this would provide connectivity, obviously, to Brighton, to the Platte River Trail, and the National Western Center and National Western Center Station. But it also will have substantial impacts on the west side due to the fact that there's really no right of way to work with on the west side of the railroad. And then the third alignment that we have studied is shifting north of 52nd Avenue and trying to work with some gaps that exist in the existing infrastructure. This alignment would also connect vehicular, bicycle, and pedestrian connectivity from Brighton to Vasquez. It would create a three-way intersection at the York Street underpass, the Brighton York underpass that we mentioned previously. And it would also propose a grade separated crossing of the railroad, whether it be an underpass or an overpass. We'll talk more and get more input about those options later. In addition, this alternative has, as you can see, substantially more impacts on the north side of 52nd. It does not impact the neighborhood as much as the previous alignment, but it does create substantial impacts and does have a much longer structure and more expensive structure that would cross the center railroad. So looking at a little bit of the detail on an underpass versus an overpass, these are a couple local examples. On the left-hand side of the screen is the bridge that crosses at Peoria Smith Street, where it crosses the commuter rail lines and the freight rail lines. The issues with a bridge structure is it would create some more visual impacts to the community. However, it is much more economical and easier to build. It would allow drainage to function as a result of the water being able to flow away from the railroads versus into a sump beneath the railroads as compared to the underpass exhibit on the right. It does have impacts to the local street network as a result of the frontage roads I mentioned previously. On the flip side, the underpass example is that the 15th Street underpass just on the north side of Union Station, where you're probably all familiar, but that's a little bit more industrial in nature. The issue with the underpass in our case is it has a substantial clearance required to get beneath the railroads, as well as the structural depth of the bridge structure itself, and creates a sump in the roadway where drainage flows into that sump or hole. And we would be required to pump that water to the river because the elevation at that sump would be lower than the water surface of the river. So that's from an engineering standpoint quite challenging. In addition, there are also the impacts surrounding the local street network with this alternative too, as well as to create an underpass beneath the railroad. Substantial railroad track line relocations would be required to allow us to construct the tunnel. And those temporary rail lines would create some substantial impact to the adjacent property owners as well in order to build this type of a facility. So with that, I will turn it over to Angela, and we'd like to get your input on some of your preferences on both the underpass, overpass, as well as the alignments we've shown.
Great, thank you. There's two questions that we're going to be doing here, everyone, just so you know. There's our first polling question on the screen right now. It'll be shortly followed by a second polling question. And then to top that, we're going to have a short Q&A section to unmute people and talk to you a little bit more about what you've heard so far, plus these polling questions. So let's get to it. Let's take a look at what people are thinking. The first one here, what appeals to you? Over or under the rail line? So think about everything that Matt just showed you. And here are the options. So you can choose 1 for over, 2 for under, 3 for equal or no difference, and 4 for no crossing. And I do believe we will see it. Yep, there it is, like magic. That's Leah being magical. So go ahead. If you want to answer this question now. And just a moment here, we are able to monitor kind of based on participants, how many people are answering. So we'll just give you a couple of more seconds here, and then we should see the results.
Yep, the responses are rolling in, so we should give it a few more seconds here.
I feel like we need a drum roll to see the answer. So we will, in one moment.
And only I know what's coming up.
Yeah.
All right. Last few seconds to make your decisions here. Okay, looks like they're slowing down. So we'll share the results of that one.
Great. So you can see on your screen that close to 60% of the participants have said that they would prefer, or it appeals to them more, to have an overpass. And then the second closest result is a little over 30% said they prefer underpass. And then you can see the last two choices were split evenly. So close to 5% said equal or no crossing. Okay, great. So we'll go to the next question and then we'll discuss these. All right, so the second polling question for everyone tonight, which of these alignment options do you prefer? So please take a look, and these were the ones that were just presented a moment ago. So 3 different alignments. Alignment 1, as you can see on the screen. Alignment 2 is the second choice. Alignment 3, as Matt presented. And then 4 would say none of the above. If you just are not able to respond right now, you could go ahead and provide that. And there's an option for you to provide additional ideas. So please take a look now and go ahead and make your selection. The quicker you select, the more time we'll have for the Q&A. And keep in mind, Matt did say at a later date, this could easily turn into a hybrid. There is no wrong answer, I guess I'm trying to say. So please go ahead and answer, and we will take a look at those responses.
The votes are quickly coming in for this one.
Good, excellent. Some of you might be participating with someone else in your household. So discuss
Right.
amongst yourself. I know members of the community working group were anxious to take these questions also. So please provide your thoughts tonight. How's it looking, Leah?
All right, let's share that one.
Oh, great. So really close here. So almost split into thirds. Alignment 1, you can see close to 1/3, alignment 2, and alignment 3 trailing a little bit behind, but not by much. And only a handful of people selected none of the above. So that's great. Very interesting. Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and advance it to the first discussion period. We are over an hour in, we have less than an hour remaining, I should say. So as I unmute and we get everybody unmuted, keep in mind that we'll probably hang in here for about a 5-minute discussion, and then we'll go back to the presentation and then have time later for another Q&A period. So let's go ahead and unmute. And again, if
So-
you have a question, please tell us your name.
Yes, and I just allowed everyone to unmute themselves, and Mercedes has had her hand up for a little bit. So you should all be able now to unmute yourself.
Mercedes, if you unmute, and then hopefully we can hear you. And looks like, and I do see that a couple other, can you hear us? Do you have a question? Go ahead.
Sí, yo sí tengo una pregunta.
Great. It sounds like you do have a question. Victoria, can you hear us and help with the question, please? We can, while we're trying to figure out some
Okay,
of the,
perdón.
that's okay.
Pues lo que yo quiero saber, si van a agrandar el 52, ¿verdad?
And let's see, I know if Victoria is able to unmute. If not, don't want to put Nola on the spot, but maybe Nola, if we can't get the technical side worked out.
Just a reminder that everybody
Perdón, es que
can go
estas
to,
están bien locas, perdón.
everybody can go to the language
Sí,
interpretation and
la pregunta
language.
es, si van a agrandar el 52, ¿sí va a afectar el terreno de donde están los trailers?
And it did sound like, I believe,
Ok, a ver cómo puedo hacer esto.
so I believe that was Catherine asking us a question also. Let me go ahead while we're trying to figure out the Spanish interpretation. I do see one question. We will absolutely come back to that question, but just to keep us moving, there's one question that Jill did put into the chat box. So maybe we start there.
Sure. Do you
Okay.
want me to repeat the question, or do you want
I
to do?
will. I'll read it, and then yes, if you would like to take a few minutes here to talk about it. But Jill basically is asking, and Jill is with Denver Streets Partnership. So she's asking, can you speak to how alignment 2 or 3 might lend itself to better transit connectivity? So transit specific question there. Are you able to answer that, Karen, please?
I can answer that question. So the primary difference in the mobility component of option 2 and option 3, as you'll see on this graphic, option 2 really has direct and immediate access to the neighborhood, as it's much closer. And that has a benefit and a disadvantage. The benefit is it's much easier to get to as a pedestrian and as a bicyclist. But on the flip side, it also means that the automotive and truck traffic will also be in that same location. Comparing option 3 to option 2 on the flip side, option 3 really kind of pushes that vehicular traffic as well as the bicycle and pedestrian traffic north of the neighborhood community. So again, it's a preference on, would you like to have immediate and direct access with ped bikes such as alignment 2 provides, or would you like to push the vehicular and truck traffic further from the neighborhood, understanding that that would also require an additional distance of pedestrian walking or bicycle travel?
And one thing I would add is that no matter what, if there was a new major infrastructure change, we would work with RTD, who is actually on the call tonight, to look at whether we would shift existing bus routing to accommodate that new connection. So there'd be a lot more to talk about if we moved forward with one of these options.
Great. So let me try this one more time, everyone. Thanks for hanging in there with us. Victoria, I can see that you are unmuted, but it does sound like from the technical side that you just need to be in both the Spanish room and the English room. So if you could join both rooms, then you should be able to help translate.
So I think she can come over to the English room and tell us the question and then go back to the Spanish room. So I think we just need her to come over to the.
So let's see if we're getting.
Yes.
See if it, oh, I think she's talking to Leah right now.
Okay.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you. What's your name?
Yes.
I came from the Spanish side.
Great.
Okay.
Is this Catherine?
So my question was that from what I'm understanding, is that 52nd is gonna become wider or bigger? And I was just wondering, will that affect the land that's where the trailer homes are at?
So that's a great question as to whether whether 52nd is going to be wider and would it affect where the trailer homes are. And right now we don't have a project. So it is not a given that 52nd is going to change at all. We're here to hear from you as to whether you would want that to happen. And if so, where you would want 52nd to connect. And if it were to connect, it would be years and years down the road. And that's why we have these different alignments and the questions about whether folks would just want a bicycle and pedestrian bridge over the rail, whether they would want alignment 2 that would go right in front of, right along 52nd, or alignment 3, which would go to the north and not be right in front of, right through the residential area. So we have no givens right now. We don't have funding even to move forward with more detailed design. We're really here to understand whether what folks prioritize in the community, and of 52nd, the Brighton York underpass, and smaller local connectivity to the National Western Center station. So there are no givens at this point. But if it was a priority for the community to move forward with connection, better connections on 52nd across the rail, there would be impacts to properties. We just have multiple alignments now and want feedback as to what folks want, what folks have the biggest concerns about and what alignments they think are best for the community and users.
Okay. Thank you so much. That was my only question.
One last thing to add is we're about a little later in our presentation to show you some conceptual cross sections, which we'll also ask for everyone's input on, that gives us a feel for whether or not the road is wider or narrower, but that's coming up soon.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. We really appreciate folks coming to the table and asking.
Okay, so I do think we captured most of the questions. And I just want to test to make sure. Karen or Matt, can you do a thumbs up? Can you hear me okay? Okay,
Yeah.
just checking. Okay, so how about this, everyone? We will try one more time here. It does sound like we can hear Victoria. So Victoria, let's try one more time to get the other question that someone was trying to ask. I believe it was Mercedes. Go ahead.
¿Sí me escucha? ¿Me escucha?
Yes.
Bueno, A mí me gustaría, ¿verdad?, que se enfocaran también más en los peatones en los peatones y parece que y mientras no afecten las residencias, está bien. Pero más mi enfoque sería en los peatones. Y también vi, ¿verdad? Abajo el puente se me hace reconocido. No sé si estoy mal pero a mí se me hace que es por la bajada de la Washington, de donde se inunda. ¿Sí me escuchan?
So we are able to hear your entire
Ajá.
question. And now if Victoria, if you could,
Allá, bueno, yo vivía por ese lado, del lado de 5 puntos, entonces era mi camino por allá. En tiempos de tormentas de agua, era una inundación terrible. Se inundaba todo abajo del puente. Muchos carros se quedaban atorados allá. Incluso nosotros no nos quedamos atrapados porque mi esposo no pasó, pero muchos sí pasaron.
so I do know some of our participants understand, and I really wish I understood all of your question. I unfortunately
Oh, I
would
think
need,
Victoria has the question.
okay. Is she going to be able to repeat it back to us now? Okay. I know we captured it. We might need to, why don't we try to troubleshoot behind the scenes while we present more of the content of the presentation? And that
So
way,
Angela, I can hear Victoria. Can you not hear her?
oh, I can't hear anything.
Yeah, I can hear Victoria as well, and I'll try to answer a little bit of the question. I think it is about pedestrian access with the grade separation. And
Correct.
yeah.
Okay, so I can't hear, but it
So
sounds
the
like Karen
questions
can. Okay.
are regarding overpass or underpass items. And these are simply examples. We have no money to do anything at all, even design something.
Okay. Ajá.
So,
and we are I'm going to answer the second half of that question really quickly. We're showing these examples simply to get feedback from folks if they are interested in a project at all, and if yes, whether they would want 52nd to go over or under. That's the only reason we're showing these examples.
So Karen, I'll look to you
Great.
if we're
And
good.
I think we're gonna go to our next section, right, Angela?
Yes.
Okay, I'll stop.
Okay. Thank you for doing this, everyone. I apologize that there's a little bit of a technical glitch, but I think it's working. So we'll just keep moving, and that's what makes working during a pandemic a little interesting, right? So thanks for your patience, everyone. The next section here, I'm going to hand it over to Will, and we will come back to you for additional polling questions and another Q&A moment. And as soon as we hear more from Will, go ahead.
Thanks, Angela. So next, we're going to go into corridor characteristics, and this is specific, again, to the 52nd Avenue focus area. We have kind of identified 3 different districts or sub areas along this 52nd Avenue area, and that's the west side that you see here. And this is obviously more commercially focused, not as much residential, except for the small amount that is just to the south and east of the west side yellow box that you see there. And then there's the neighborhood piece, which you see in red. Obviously that encompasses the mobile home community as well as the single family homes, and includes the Swansea neighborhood park. And then on the far east side, it's the commercial area. And as we get into this process, I just would like to remind folks that these are just examples that we're presenting to kind of jog your creative juices to really understand what you want to see as part of the street. So we're going to get into the elements such as sidewalks, bike lanes, parking, those sorts of conversations based on each one of these corridor areas. And you guys are the experts, and we really want to hear back from you as to what you'd like your street to be. So again, like the last section, we'll do a preference polling and discussion to follow this particular section. So I'm going to start on the east side, and that's the commercial district / character area. And that encompasses larger blocks, bigger parcels. And because of those land uses in the area, there's more trucks and vehicular movements. You also have large curb cuts, also known as driveways, so that those big trucks and cars can access those larger commercial and industrial parcels. We also understand that there's a lot of employment in this area, and that's an important component to keep in mind as we think about the 52nd Avenue vision. In this area, it's more of the 60-foot right-of-way that we had discussed earlier, and that's typical throughout until you hit the mobile home community in Swansea Neighborhood Park. And within this area, those trucks and cars tend to need more regional more connections to the larger region, just based on the business and what they do. So wanted to present these two cross sections as that really kind of explore the ideas as to what we can do in this area. And one thing to keep in mind as we move through each one of these sections is how we balance different modes on the street. And again, because we have all these different uses in such a small area, we need to really concentrate on how we balance these modes across a future cross section. So this particular example shows a separated bike facility on one side. That would be the north side right here. That would be a 5-foot bike lane that's separated with a 2-foot buffer from two 10.5-foot drive lanes, which would be down the middle of the street. What that 2-foot buffer does for the bike lane is it provides a more comfortable place for cyclists of all types, from commuters to families. You would be more comfortable using that bike lane as opposed to one that didn't have that buffer, especially right next to moving vehicles. And then also think about large trucks. Again, we have cyclists, large semis. One way we can deal with balancing those needs is to put in that 2-foot buffer. This would also include an 8-inch amenity zone on either side of the street that would separate the street from the sidewalks. We have a 6-foot sidewalk on one side, that'd be on the north side. And that one's a bit smaller than the 10-foot sidewalk that's on the south side of the street, because if you look at it, we only have one bike lane. So that 10-foot walk on the south side or to the left of the section would be more multimodal and would satisfy both pedestrian and bicycle needs. What's important in this is that there's an 8-foot amenity zone that provides that buffer. What that 8-foot amenity zone also offers is an opportunity for beautification and aesthetic improvements. Typically within a commercial area, you would have a hardscape, concrete pavement, things like that, with trees and tree grates rather than what you would see in a neighborhood, which would be grass with trees. This particular section stays within the existing 60-foot right-of-way. This next section I'm going to show you is a little different from this one, and I'll kind of pick out some of the differences. But again, these aren't set in stone. It isn't either or. Keep in mind, maybe there's a piece from this one and a piece from the other one that you'd like to be combined. And we'd like to find out, what that mix is, and we'll do that after we get through these two sections. So the second commercial section has a 6-foot walk on either side. Again, that's different than the other one where we had an unbalanced 6-foot walk in a 10-foot sidewalk. So this would be more evenly balanced. And what that does provide us with is 7 feet of on-street parking immediately adjacent to that bike lane. So this would provide for any on-street parking needs associated with those businesses. But to provide for that parking lane, we had to get rid of that buffer. So that bike lane becomes a little less desirable for perhaps families or novice cyclists. However, the addition of the 7-foot parking lane does provide a measure of buffering from those 2 11-foot drive lanes, which are a little bigger than the 10.5-foot drive lanes that we had discussed previously, and might meet the needs of large tractor trailers that kind of permeate the area. Within this particular configuration, this is a 62-foot right-of-way versus the existing 60-foot right-of-way we see out there right now, and would also include the amenity zones that I had discussed previously. So, Angela, I'll hand it off to you for our next polling question.
Great, thanks, Will, so much. So just to keep everybody informed, there will be a couple of poll questions here, and then in just a moment, we will get over to another question and answer opportunity. So this first poll question, please get ready. Which of these sections do you prefer for the commercial section? So looking on the left side of your screen, there is the cross section of section 1, and this is the example that Will just walked everyone through. And then the other option is section 2, the picture on the right. So also you have a way that you could provide feedback in the chat feature, but please go ahead. There is the question. It just popped up. Go ahead and jump in. Don't be shy. We'd like to hear your answer right away. And that way we can save some time to talk. Okay, so in just a moment, we will share the results. We'll see.
Votes are rolling in.
This is exciting. I like the polling
The
opportunity.
suspense.
Yes. Okay, so make sure if you haven't answered, please go ahead and do that now.
Okay, a couple more seconds.
Okay.
People make their choices. Okay.
Let's take a look. Oh, nice. Okay, so it does look like close to 65% of the participants did choose section 2 this evening, followed by about 36% chose section 1. That's great. Okay, so we will move on to the next slide here. I believe Will is going to share a little bit more, and then we'll have another polling question.
Thanks, Angela. So we're going to move on to our next kind of district or sub area as part of 52nd, and that's the neighborhood area. Obviously, this is primarily residential. Some of the characteristics that you see in this area are multiple intersections because you have smaller streets and smaller parcels relative to what we just saw in the commercial area. This does incorporate Swansea Neighborhood Park. And the condition in this particular area is that the homes address the street from the side. And that's an important consideration to keep in mind as we think about these different street sections. Rather than a front door on 52nd, we see the sides of homes facing onto 52nd. Uses in this area drive more bicycle and pedestrian needs, obviously, and connections and mobility across modes from vehicular to bike to pedestrian to scooter to transit. The right-of-way in this area is 20 to 60 feet, as we had previously shown. And more of the connections in this area are locally focused rather than those regional connections. One thing to also consider in this particular character area is that the Swansea Neighborhood Park has a very busy transit stop, and it is functioning as a park and ride currently. And there's a lot of parking out there right now for folks that are using the bus. So we just wanted to mention that as an existing condition. So again, these are 2 examples that can be mixed and matched. This is the example cross section 1. So we have bike lanes in both directions. Those would be 5-foot bike lanes. The one on the north side would be buffered by 7 feet of on-street parking. And then the one on the south side would be 5 feet. And that would be not buffered and would be immediately adjacent to the drive lane. So the 5-foot bike lane on the north might be a little more comfortable, while the 5-foot bike lane on the south might be better fit for more intermediate to expert cyclists. The amenity zone in this area differs a little from the commercial amenity zone in that it's more softscape. Obviously, you have opportunities for planters, grass, turf, as well as trees. Again, bringing an opportunity for aesthetic improvements in the area. And this would also include balanced 6-foot sidewalks on each side of the street and 10-foot travel lanes within the roadway. Now, these are not much, but they are smaller than what we had previously seen in the commercial section, primarily because the smaller lane width provides for traffic calming and is more geared towards cars rather than trucks. And in this example, we're looking at a 65-foot right-of-way as opposed to the existing 20 to 60-foot right-of-way out there. So there would be some property impacts within this particular condition with the additional 5 feet needed as part of this section. The second one has a buffered bike lane on the north side. Again, that's more comfortable for all users. And then it's further buffered by parking. And then the 2 10-foot drive lanes and the 2 8-foot amenity zone / tree lawns. Now the one on the south side, that amenity zone can be used to create a better bus stop. As I had previously mentioned at Swansea Neighborhood Park. We know that's a very busy stop, and that amenity zone could provide space for shelter, benches, things that make it more formal along the edge. And then on the south side, past that amenity zone, we would have a 10-foot sidewalk / multimodal path that could accommodate pedestrians as well as cyclists. So cyclists coming towards us would use that south side 10-foot walk, and bicyclists moving away from us would use the 5-foot bike lane that you see on the north side there. So I think that takes us to our next polling question, Angela.
I'm going to jump in to try to keep us moving. So the poll question is, which of these sections do you prefer for the neighborhood portion? Section 1, the picture on the left, and section 2, the picture on the right. Please pick either section 1 or 2 and keep those great comments coming in the chat box, but go ahead and answer this polling question now so we don't run out of time. In just one moment, we will share the results. Let's take a look and hear from Leah if people are submitting their answers.
Oh yeah, they are coming in.
Good.
I think it just takes a minute to think about it before you make your choice.
And if people are able to read some of the great discussion going on in the chat section, please take a look. There are lots of great comments coming in. And we are tracking all of them. We are going to create a meeting summary tonight as well. So if we do run out of time to answer these questions specifically, we will summarize them and post them in the meeting summary. The results are up, they're in. So section 1 received 57% of the responses, and section 2 received 43% of the responses. That is a great polling question. A couple more slides and we will have one more poll before we get to your questions. Go ahead, Will.
Thanks, Angela. So this is the last character area along 52nd and is the most wide open precisely because we don't have any right of way in the area. So we're not as restricted. Again, this has even larger super blocks than the commercial neighborhood area, bigger parcels, more truck and vehicular needs, large curb cuts, driveways for parcel access. We also know this is an important employment center, and we have anywhere from 0 feet to 20 feet of right of way to work with. So there will be some property impacts on this side, and then more regional connection needs. So this is our first example cross section to look at. This would have bike lanes in both directions, buffered by on-street parking, as well as 2 8-foot amenity zones and 6.5-foot sidewalks on either side of the street. One of the differences here that you're seeing is an 11-foot as opposed to 10-foot drive lane to accommodate some of those larger trucks. And the amenity zone would offer opportunities for enhanced transit stops in the area. Thinking that, you know, if vehicular connections are made over the rail, that a future bus route could go down this particular street. This would be a 75-foot right of way, excuse me. And then I'll go cross section 2. This would have buffered bike lanes on both sides. So these are a little more approachable for all cyclists. On-street parking on both sides to further buffer those cyclists. And an amenity zone, hardscape with trees, as we had discussed earlier in the commercial zone, very similar. And then 6-foot walks on both sides. This would accommodate 12-foot drive lanes, making it easier for large trucks to traverse the street. And then again, opportunities for enhanced transit stops. This is kind of a full suite of a street. So this would be 5 feet larger than what we had previously seen and incorporate an 80-foot right of way.
Okay, so our next polling question, and then we're going to jump into a quick Q&A. So please take a look here. Which of these sections do you prefer for the west side? As Will just presented. So section 1, please take a look on the left, or section 2, the other image on the right. Please go ahead and make your selection. We will share the results in one moment. Okay.
Answers are coming in.
Excellent.
A few more last seconds for those of you trying to make your decision.
Don't miss your chance, everyone.
Okay, there are the results.
Close results. Okay, so section 1 was about 42%, and the other section 2 received 58% of the selection tonight. Okay, this is great. So I believe now we are going back to a discussion opportunity. So we have a couple of good questions coming in. We did want to just go ahead and grab a question that Josh asked a moment ago. So I believe Karen's going to help us answer this, but Josh did ask us in the chat box if the neighborhood cross section number 1 that Will walked through, talking specifically about right of way in the residential area versus the commercial area, and how to provide different sections and widths in those both directions. So Karen, are you able to help us answer that really quickly?
Sure. Again, this is our kickoff meeting, and we were trying to provide a wide variety of options to get a wide variety of feedback. And we could have a standard right of way across board. It could be 100 feet. It could be 60 feet. It could be 40 feet. It could be anywhere in between. Obviously, the wider the right of way, the greater the impact, whether it's in a business area, in a residential area. Some of the areas are mixed where there's residential on one side and business on the other, et cetera. So we're really just here to hear what your top priorities are. The end result might be that 52nd isn't the top priority, and some focus on pedestrians and sidewalks is the top priority. So all of this is just fodder to, as I think Will said, get your creative juices going and get your feedback. And we want to hear from you about all of your concerns and all of your interests and priorities. So with that, I will stop talking and let you all continue.
So
Angela?
let's take, great, Karen, thank you. Let's see if we can take one more question here and then move back to the presentation to make sure we get through it all and to save time at the end. So I want to see, Leah, can you help us check in with Victoria to see if there are any other questions from our Spanish speaking participants tonight? and then we can unmute the English speaking line second.
Sure, yep. I'll give her a second to see if anybody has a question.
Thank you. And if anybody would like to submit anything in the chat box as well, that's a great way to get information over to the project team.
And I will quickly apologize if some of the answers in chat that I'm typing away are a little incomplete, because that's life while we're juggling.
We did discover.
Okay, there are no questions right now from the Spanish channel. Thank you,
Great.
Victoria.
Thank you. We did discover that other members of the team are able to hear the Spanish line better than I am tonight for some reason. So thank you for checking, Leah. I appreciate it. Okay, well, let's unmute the English line really quick and just see if we do have any questions. And please remember to state your name. So you have the opportunity. You can unmute yourself now, I should say, if anybody would like to. Otherwise, we have plenty of content to keep moving through. So, okay. I'm not seeing anything on my screen. So let's move back to the presentation and we'll get back to your questions in a moment. So now I'm going to hand it over, I believe, to Karen.
Actually, I
this is
think
Matt.
we're going to Matt, and I'm next though.
I was so certain. You're right. It's Matt. Thank you.
So we're going to leave the 52nd Avenue study area now and move up to the Brighton York underpass. I think, as probably everyone on this call knows, it's a very hazardous, low clearance existing underpass. You can see here on the images, some trucks don't even fit beneath the bridge today. It's 11'4" vertical clearance, and minimum recommendations are typically 16.5 feet of minimum clearance. So it is a very deficient condition from a vertical clearance, as well as horizontally, the curvature that comes into that. There's very limited sight distance, and it's a very nasty place for pedestrians and bicycles today. In addition, there's environmental impacts associated with the rail contamination, moving of petroleum and coal over the years, that most of that underlying soil is contaminated, as well as the aesthetics. You can see the nice graffiti painted bridge. It could use some improvements. So we'd like to get your input for some of our ideas here. But the primary issue would be creating additional vertical clearance to meet the minimum requirements, providing a multimodal facility beneath the crossing to get to York Street to the northwest. In addition, trying to create a safer environment by creating more open airspace and more visibility, not just beneath the bridge itself, but the approach of Brighton as it approaches the intersection. We also think that this could be a nice gateway, as it is the entry into the city and county of Denver, and could be a nice gateway feature as you cross over into the city line. And lastly, this will take a lot of coordination with the BNSF Railroad, as well as the RTD commuter rail. This crossing, I failed to mention, crosses the commuter rail lines, which is much higher in elevation, but is immediately overhead.
Okay,
So
I see the poll question there. Should I jump in?
Go for it.
All right, let's do it. So now a bicycle pedestrian question for us. How important are bicycle and pedestrian improvements beneath Brighton York underpass to you? So please go ahead. This question will pop up in a moment. Go ahead and answer either the first option, extremely important, second, somewhat important, or third, not very important. Please go ahead and answer, and we will take a look at the results. Hopefully everyone got their answer in.
Bunch of responses are coming in.
It's fantastic.
Last few seconds, they're still clicking in. Okay, there are the results.
Okay, great. So nearly 60% of everyone tonight did say that this is extremely important to them. And then about 21% split for somewhat as well as not very. So thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your thoughts. And earlier, like I said, we are going to go ahead and go through this discussion and skip it. We ask that you instead submit questions and comments in the chat feature. We are saving our time to present this last portion and close out with a discussion period instead. So with that, I will have Karen go ahead and jump in like I thought earlier. Now it's your turn, Karen. Go ahead.
Thanks, Angela. So our final focus area 3, last but not least, is those pedestrian connections that we've heard people allude to being very important in the community. I think one of our first speakers was saying, you know, I want to focus on pedestrian connections, and here's that opportunity. The connections to National Western Center and Line Station. These connections can be multimodal. It's not just about pedestrian connections, bike connections, vehicular connections, and obviously we have the new 47th and York connection, which really does enhance and provide a grade separated crossing there where we did not have one before, but there are a lot of other opportunities. And again, please put some comments on the in the chat if you have additional thoughts on some of the sidewalk improvements in the area. One of the things that we do have an opportunity to do is look at some possible additions to the Globeville, Elyria, Swansea sidewalk bond funds, which are currently looking at doing some additional sidewalks in the area. And if there is a real interest in some other areas with sidewalk gaps, we can see if we can add those, in particular along 52nd. Sorry, we're advancing another project in the area. It's Goodwill. It's all good. Is that coming up next year, 48th Avenue sidewalk improvements. So that will be adding significant additional sidewalks on the south side of 48th. We just wanted to use this opportunity to remind folks that might have been involved in those conversations before that's still coming. It's happening. There'll be a lot of outreach around that construction as that comes closer. You can see the schedule, the tentative schedule. It's construction, so everything is tentative at this point, but potential of starting that construction as soon as May of next year, wrapping up at the end of next year. We'll keep you posted. There'll be a separate outreach on that, but wanted to let you know there's a lot going on in terms of sidewalk improvements in the area. So with that, I think our next piece is a polling question, two polling questions. So I will stop talking and hand it over to Angela to go through the polling.
Great, let's do this. So this question here, everyone, get ready. What are your biggest priorities for connections to the National Western Center and Line Station? Easy for me to say. So your choices are better pedestrian connections, or better bike facilities, or better crossings, or better vehicle drop-off facilities. You can also choose all of the above. And then you can also select these connections to the station are just not very important to me. So please go ahead and make your selection, and we will check the results in just a moment. So as we wait for those results to come in, don't hesitate to let us know if anything's on your mind in that chat box.
A few more responses are still coming in.
Okay.
Last few seconds here to tell us what you think.
Thank you, Leah.
Okay, there's the results.
Okay, fantastic. So over 40% of people did say that better pedestrian connections was the most important, and followed by 8% for better bike facilities. Oh, and I'm sorry, I'm staring right at all of the above. 50% was actually the first choice. So over the half of you have said that all of the above is the most important. And then that was followed by better pedestrian connections. Thank you, everyone. There is one more question for us here. So which is the following is the most important to you? So think about this as your top priority. This answer here will actually help us assist in prioritization of future projects. So think about that. So please select your top priority now. The box has popped up. So what important improvement would you like to see? Brighton York Underpass, 52nd Avenue, overpass, underpass across the rail line, improvements to existing 52nd Avenue, or connections to the end line to the station. Again, go ahead and take a second to answer and we will look at the results. This will help us prioritize future projects, so please do answer this one. Okay, drum roll, please.
Right. There we go.
Okay, this time I'm going to look at all of them before I start rattling off the answers. Okay, so 42% of you tonight did say the 52nd Avenue overpass, underpass across the rail line was your first choice or your first priority. And then that was followed by 33% of the selections were for connections to the end line station. And then trailing behind, the Brighton York Underpass was the third choice there. Great. Well, thank you. That was very helpful. We're going to close out with a discussion. I do want to make sure that we save at least 60 seconds at the end to put up the next step slide so people know where we're headed. But let's go ahead and check. Leah, do you mind asking Victoria if there are any questions from Spanish participants? And then we'll turn to the English channel.
Sure. Yeah, I'll wait to hear from her.
And then let's see if there's any new questions in the chat box while we wait.
Okay, we haven't heard any yet.
Okay.
From the Spanish channel.
Okay. We will go ahead and allow all other participants to unmute if you do have a question that you would like to ask as we get ready to close tonight's presentation. I will also share other ways to reach us in the future, but if anybody would like to unmute themselves and tell us who you are, we'll answer your question now.
I can't believe that no one has any questions. Have we exhausted you, or completely and astonishingly well explained the information?
There is a question in the chat just about the survey results.
Yeah, it does look like, yeah, Josh is asking about the eastern connection to Colorado Boulevard.
Yes, Josh, your question was about if there was any additional information. It was simply from the survey. It was a high-level question of what are the, what are connections are most important. So we don't really have any more information about that. But if anyone on the call those connections are important to them, please educate.
And it was anonymous, so there was no way to know if it was coming
Right.
from residents or businesses or.
Okay, I do
Hey,
see.
this is AE. Is my question about horses totally irrelevant?
Hi, AE.
In
Thank
the
you
chat.
I didn't see it. I'm sorry.
Well, no, I was just, over the years, there's been some conversation with the NWC planning and stuff about horse trails and horse crossings, kind of for the fun of it. But then but anyway, they also bring the dancing Mexican horses to Our Lady of Grace when we don't have pandemics. And I just wonder if there's a way to incorporate this into these conversations. And I like the cement surfacing along Brighton more than the asphalt.
Okay. we certainly could consider whether any additional connections, what all is included in that multimodal factor. Horses can be part of the multimodal spectrum. So we will take that into consideration, and thank you for that, because that's good to know that that some of the dancing horses do come into the neighborhood and may need to think about how that could be facilitated.
The non-motorized forms of transportation.
Yeah.
Thanks for asking your question, AE, and thanks for answering, Karen. If there's one last parting question, I will take that now. Or I also notice people are starting to drop off, so we might take the 4 minutes we have left and talk about next steps.
So can I ask a question?
Yes.
It says Mark McDonald. I'm with Adams County Public Works.
Hi, Mark.
And,
Thanks.
I guess I'll have to follow up with you guys at a later time. I'm assuming, I don't know if there's been communications, or I don't know if I didn't recognize anybody from Commerce City on this call, but obviously they're at each end of the connections here.
Mhm.
You guys didn't talk much about trying to complete, if this were to happen, trying to tie 52nd. You said tie 52nd at Vasquez in Colorado, but I'm not, my picture in my mind isn't completely clear, but it seems there's a railroad track between Colorado and Vasquez, and how, there wasn't any discussion at all tonight about how to complete that. And if you can't connect back over further to the east, it seems like there's value to maybe trying to connect further to the east. I'm not sure. Maybe that just connects more industrial commercial over there and isn't of real value at this point. But there wasn't any discussion about trying to complete that connection tonight?
No, that's right. Thanks, Mark, for bringing that up. The focus really, because the connection between Steel Vasquez and Colorado is primarily focused on one property owner, and as you said, rail. So for this meeting, since we have so much that we're trying to cover, we were focusing on the area where we had a much larger number of stakeholders and much more complex series of interactions. Obviously, the connection between Steel Vasquez and Colorado for 52nd is complex as well, but we just had to make some decisions as to what we could cover and get the most critical feedback on the core. And we will, Angela, maybe we can, or Kara, go to the next steps slide. We will have, we will be refining and identifying priorities and alternatives with engineering analysis, cost, and possible impacts and benefits. And Mark, that'll be an opportunity to dive a little bit more into that Steel Vasquez Colorado connection. We will be having another community working group meeting early in 2021 after some more additional alternatives analysis, and we'll meet with the larger public again in early 2021 after we have that community working group meeting. And we have had high-level conversations with Commerce City. They are aware of this project, and other folks within Adams County. We do have an internal working group that includes Denver staff and Adams County. And when we last chatted with Commerce City, they said, just keep us informed. But and so we've been doing that at a very high level. I hope that answers your question.
Sure. No, thank you. Just wondered where we stood on things. So
Yeah.
Thank
Great.
you. Do you want to show everyone how to stay in touch with the project team? If you could
That'd
show
be
us
a
that.
great idea.
Yeah.
So we really appreciate folks' time tonight and want to be respectful. We have 1 minute left. So the project webpage is a great spot to get additional information. As we said at the beginning of this meeting, the meeting is recorded and will be up here in the next couple days. It will take a minute to get it there, but that will be posted there. You can call me. As you might imagine, I'm not at my desk. That is my desk phone number, but I get any voicemail left. So please leave a voicemail. It'll come through to me at home. And you can always email me. Just beware that I don't sleep a lot. So you might get an email back at 3 in the morning, but I promise I won't call you back at 3 in the morning. So with that, I'm going to take a quick peek at the chat. And Josh had another question about, yes, we are still exploring making that connection. And good point that that is very important for that Steele Vasquez to Colorado connection is important for the Sand Creek Trail connection. We will take that into account. And with that, thank you very much to all our participants that are still on. We really appreciate you. Appreciate you continuing to share information about this project and letting other folks know about it. They can still listen to, check in on, listen to this meeting or get highlights from the webpage. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to Victoria for her support this evening. And thanks to our team for doing, I think, a wonderful job.
Thank you, Karen. And everyone, please do check back for the project meeting summary. We will share that. So take a look at that, hopefully in the next week or two. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. Stay well, and we'll be in touch soon. Bye-bye.
Gracias.
Be safe and have a good holiday.
Gracias a todos. Que tengan
Good
muy
night.
buenas noches.
Night.
Okay.